Good evening. At 6 p.m. on October 22nd, and the Gardner City Hall will call to order the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. Would you please rise, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Since this is the first meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals and we don't have an elected chairman or vice chairman, I'm opening the meeting. I'm the Director of Business and Economic Development, acting as the acting chair for the start of the meeting. So we would move down to, we don't have a consent agenda and we don't have a set of consent agenda minutes to approve. So the first item of business would be to look at the regular agenda that's appropriated before you and it's for the election of officers. So I would open the floor for considering the election of chair and vice chair for the Board of Zoning Appeals. Sorry, first, we need to do roll call. Thank you. I was reading and not listening. So if we will start on Mr. McNear.
McNear here. Ford here.
Roberts here.
Bowden here.
Simmons Lee here. Mater here.
Gardner here.
We have a quorum. Thank you. So if we will now move to the regular agenda and the election of officers, we will consider the election of chair and vice chair for the Board of Zoning Appeals. It can be any one of you. Let's consider the chair first. I'll open the nominations.
I'd like to nominate Tori Roberts as chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Second.
I have a nomination of Tori Roberts from Adriana Mayer, second by Joe Gardner. Any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Joe Gardner.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have two people now nominated for chair, so we will, any other nominations? Any discussion? We will vote. Okay, all those for Tori Roberts, please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, thank you. All those for Joe Gardner, raise your hand. Kiva, thank you. So the vote goes to Tori Roberts, who is now acting chair for the BZA. Did someone not vote?
I didn't vote.
Oh, Tori.
She abstained.
I abstained.
You abstained, thank you.
Nomination.
So we have one abstention. We have 5 for Tori Roberts, 1 for Joe Gardner, and 1 abstention. So Tori, you're the winner.
Okay.
I will turn over the chairmanship to you for the election of the vice chair.
Okay. So, do we have a motion for the vice chair?
I'd like to make a motion that we appoint Joe Gardner as vice chair.
Second.
Okay. Any other nominations?
I would like to nominate McNear for vice chair.
Okay. So we have two nominations. Do we need a second?
Second.
Second. Okay. So do we have any other nominations? Okay, any discussion? Okay. So all those in favor of Joe Gardner for the vice chairman of the BZA? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Oh, raise your hand, raise your hand.
Almost like a roll call.
Can't tell who's saying aye.
I gotcha. All those in favor of Steve McNair for vice chairman? Any abstentions? Okay, so I believe the vote goes 5-0 for Joe Gardner to be the vice chairman with 1 abstention, right? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, 5-1.
5-1. I
With one.
apologize. 5-1.
Gotta count my
With
vote.
one
One
abstention.
abstention.
Okay. So, Joe Gardner is the vice chairman of the BCA. Okay, I think we're on to regular agenda item number 2. Do we need, before I start that, do we need to make the amendment for the discussion item that you mentioned when, or is that just part of number 3? I wasn't,
You can just go ahead and, when we get to the time where the discussion items,
Okay.
where we talk, just bring it up that way.
okay, so for, we're on regular agenda item number 2, which is consider approval of the minutes as written for the meeting on November 7th, 2017. Do
I
we
make
have-
a, oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes as written for the meeting on November 7th, 2017.
Second.
Okay. I don't know. And I have a question. Are we commissioners on Board of Zoning, or are we just our name? Board member? Okay.
Emphasis on board. Sorry.
Thank you.
Let the record show. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, so a motion was made by Board Member Mader to approve the minutes from November 7th, 2017, and a second was made by Board Member Bowden. Any discussions? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Item number 2 passes. Number 3, number 3, bylaws. Consider amendments to the bylaws of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And I think we have a presentation.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for serving dual duty. We'll talk about this. Hopefully you won't have to do this very often. But the reason that we are amending the bylaws for the Board of Zoning Appeals is, first of all, consistency with the recent ordinance that designated you all as members of the BZA. And that just deals with the membership provisions and with meeting provisions, pretty simple stuff. Also, consistency with the land development code. There's some things that needed updating as far as code references, department references, and obviously the number needed for a quorum. So that is included in the bylaws amendment. Also did a little bit of updating of rules and procedures pertaining to attendance, order of business, public hearings, and voting. So the key provisions for attendance, pretty much the same as what you would expect. Please notify staff prior to the start of any meeting if you'll be absent. And the expectation is that you will not miss 3 consecutive meetings without an excuse. And the excuse would be something more than just an inconvenience. And that you'll attend a minimum of 2/3 of the regular meetings in a rolling 12-month period. So that may only be 1 meeting, so we'll see. Since the Land Development Code was adopted in 2016, we've actually only had 1 BZA meeting that wasn't just for elections or training, and that was a variance request for a 14-foot variance from the required rear setback for an attached covered patio, and that variance was denied as recommended. So that's the only thing that's happened since the Land Development Code. And the reason for that, as we'll talk about next, is some of the flexibility that's built into Land Development Code. Also, the meeting standards will meet from 6 to 7 p.m. before the Planning Commission meeting. There are options that I've discussed with the attorney. What would happen if we go beyond 7 p.m. on the BZA meeting and the Planning Commission meeting starts at 7? He said we could continue the BZA hearing until a later date or until later in the evening, immediately after the conclusion of the Planning Commission meeting, which you know those kind of last a while. We could also continue the BZA meeting until 7:05 p.m. In the meantime, we would convene the Planning Commission meeting and continue it immediately after the conclusion of the BZA. So those are the options in case you were wondering what the heck would happen if something goes a little longer. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about the flexibility that we have in the code when we talk about the guide to the land development code. But for now, we would recommend that you approve the proposed amendments to the bylaws of the Board of Zoning Appeals as written to achieve consistency with ordinance number 2617. Also Kansas statute, KSA 12759, and Robert's Rules of Order newly revised.
Okay, thank you. Does any of the board members have any questions for staff on the presentation?
So, I have a question. There was no meeting at all in 2018?
There was a meeting. Oh, thank you. There was a meeting, and it was just for training and electing officers.
So the minutes that we
Oh,
have.
we didn't elect officers?
No, we were supposed to have one, and then knowing that the council was going to vote to combine the membership of the Planning Commission and BZA, we kept putting that off until the time where we could have a full board and it was more helpful.
Okay. It just was curious to me because I feel like if you miss 3 consecutive meetings, that's 6 years of absences. It was just kind of weird. But if it's every year, then it's 3 years of absences before you get removed at the rate we're going. Okay. And then I just wanted to throw my hat in the ring and say that I think if the meeting does run late, it would be beneficial to actually open the Planning Commission and then continue with the BZA. That's just my opinion, though.
I think it'll all just kind of depend on, what we have going, but that's a good point. Yep, good to have it out there, Jim.
I also have a question. If we theoretically have one meeting in a year or every 2 years and we need to be present for 2/3 of the meeting and you're gone for that meeting, how does that fit into the membership? If you need to be within 2/3 of a meeting in a 12-month period, if there's only one meeting and you miss the meeting, you're at 0%, not 66.6%.
I can assure you we're not going to kick you off for that.
Okay. I want to make sure I've got my name tag right.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay, I would entertain a motion.
I move for approval to propose amendments to the bylaws of the Board of Zoning Appeals as written to achieve consistency with ordinance number 2617, KSA 12-759, and Robert's Rules of Order newly revised.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, we have a motion on the floor as presented by Board Member Bowden and second by Board Member McNair. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 7-0. Okay, we are on to regular agenda item number 4, meeting deadline and schedule. Consider adopting the 2019-2020 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting application deadline and meeting schedule. We've got that in our packet. I don't know if there's a presentation or not. I mean, it's pretty.
We'll have to make one change to it in the motion on, it has Friday, January 10th, 2019 for the application deadline, and that'll need to be changed to Friday, January 10th, 2020 as part of the motion.
Okay, any other discussion or questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion.
I move staff recommends that the Board of Zoning Appeals adopt the 2019-2020 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting application deadline and meeting schedule with a change to application deadline Friday, January 10th, 2019 to show Friday, January 10th, 2020.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Bowden to accept the 2019-2020 BZA application deadline and meeting schedule with an amended date of Friday, January 10th, 2020 for application deadline. And a second by Board Member Mader. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, item number 4 passes 7-0. And I believe we are now ready for discussion item, and it was not posted, but we would like to add a discussion of the BZA guide. Do we need to have a motion for that as a discussion item? Okay.
Thank you for entertaining that addition to the agenda. Mainly, I just wanted to focus on the things that are different in BZA decisions than planning commission decisions. Most of the procedures that you're going to be used to, it'll be the same kind of thing. And you're familiar with some of the land development code already, just from the review criteria and everything that we go through. It's not enabling me. Oh, there we go. What you may not, have any of you ever served as a Board of Zoning Appeals member? Okay, we have one, that's awesome. So you are authorized by the state and within our land development code to do appeals of administrative decisions, and that would be staff decisions, whoever is authorized to make those administrative decisions. If someone challenges them, you would hear an appeal. You would also hear requests for variances, and variances are requests to not follow the land development code provisions. So when you are looking at appeals, your job is to determine if that administrative official made an error in the interpretation or the administration or the enforcement of the code. So it's not whether you think that standard makes sense or anything like that, it's just, given the code, did that official make an error? So you would approach the hearing with the presumption that that official decision is correct. And then it would be the appellant that would need to prove to you or persuade you that the administrative official was in error. So you, in this decision, would take on the same authority and the same powers as that administrative official. You would have no more powers than they do. You would have the same information that they do, and you would just be kind of second guessing what they did. And you can reverse or wholly or partly affirm or even modify the decision that's being appealed. And then if someone challenges the BZA decision, that would go to district court. So any questions on appeals? Yes.
So if someone's making an appeal to administrative decisions, that is just city administrative people. That wouldn't be someone making an appeal to the planning commission to come to Board of Zoning to make that appeal.
Do you have the chart? Because I don't think we might count planning commission in some cases as administrative officials. I have it.
No, because the appeal to a planning commission decision is to district court.
Well, that's a good question. So let's just make sure. We have table 3.1 in the land development code, kind of outlines who does the different appeals. And so most of the appeals, the governing body would handle appeals of plats. And plan development proposals, if there's any appeals to those. They also, the governing body would also handle appeals of site plans decisions. What'd you say? Yep. So then under the planning commission on the right hand, under review body, where it says PC, the planning commission would handle appeals of administrative plats. And administrative plats are the ones that Larry would approve. Okay, and also of administrative site plans, also ones that Larry would approve. So mostly it would just be appeals of staff, I guess is what this is saying.
Okay.
Okay, good job for a good question. Any other questions on appeals? Okay. On variances, there are really strict statutory limitations for granting of variances in the state statute. So, you know, the power to grant a variance is supposed to be exercised sparingly, only in rare instances and very specific circumstances. So, first of all, you can't even grant a use variance. So they have to follow the uses that are allowed in our code, or any flexibility that we allow in our code for uses, which we do have some ways of granting flexibility on that, and we'll talk about that. But you cannot grant a variance for that. You can grant dimensional variances. So somebody wants a different setback than in what is required, for instance, or a different height. But in order to grant that, they have to meet all of the criteria for variances. You want to bring those up? And I think that's sometimes Ryan will refer to the golden standards, and those are reflected in our review criteria for variances.
Sorry, this jumped when I moved it over.
I think it might be the last one, maybe not the last one. So you can see how Michelle is maneuvering through the code, and I think that's helpful, so you'll know where to find it. So there's 5 review criteria and they have to meet all of them. So the variance has to arise from conditions that are unique to the subject property, that are not ordinarily found in the same zoning district, and not a result of the owner's intentional action. Maybe somebody has some weird terrain thing, you know, that impacts what they can do on their lot, for instance. There's really not a lot of examples that I can give you of when this would occur. And the idea is that if someone were to ask for a variance on setback and it wasn't a really unique situation, you know, maybe the best way to handle that is, if this happens a lot, that people are asking for the same kind of variance, is to amend your code. But you treat everyone that's similarly situated the same, and you try to just maintain that consistency and maintain the intent of your code and the basis for your code. The other one is that the granting of the variance will not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. And this is a big one. The strict application of the provisions of the zoning regulations for which the variance is requested will constitute unnecessary hardship or practical difficulties on the property owner in the application. So you might think, well, what is unnecessary hardship and what are practical difficulties? And this is something lots of people have wondered, and this is, you know, there's court cases that have kind of established, what does this really mean? And so typically, if you are going to have an unnecessary hardship, courts have interpreted that to mean that's not just a mere economic advantage or disadvantage to the landowner. It would be if the landowner is deprived of any economically feasible use of the property. Not the use that he wants, but any feasible use. So That's what an unnecessary hardship is. And practical difficulty has been interpreted, there again, that the variance can only be granted for reasons related to the property, not to owner experienced hardship or practical difficulty. There may be conditions of the land that make it unsuitable for a permitted use, but only if that hardship is unique to that property and not other properties. And there again, if that peculiarity applies to multiple properties, say a Gardner Lake or something like that, then you might want to come, amend your ordinance to cover those things. And also, if you're looking at a variance request, maybe you think they have some basic, they meet all these standards, that it doesn't affect the public health, safety, morals. If you grant it, it would not be opposed to the general spirit and intent of the code. You might also decide that a lesser relaxation of the standards would be more appropriate. So maybe you'd ask the applicant, well, instead of a 14-foot variance, could you get by with 7 foot or something? And maybe that would work for them and they hadn't really thought about that, and you can reach a compromise. So the reason we don't have these come up very, very often is because of that built-in flexibility. So let's go back and talk about that. So we have administrative adjustments. Those can be granted by staff in some instances or by the planning commission in some instances. It just depends on who's the decision maker. But there are, specific criteria for those administrative adjustments that you have all gone through and you've seen before. There are other flexibility built into our street design standards, and those can be granted or recommended by the city engineer. We have a lot of flexibility built into our use standards for specific uses. The plan district also allows flexibility or deviation requests on just about any standard, as long as they're meeting the intent for the plan district and the review criteria. And then we have some flexibility built into our access and parking standards as well. So you can see we cover a wide variety of things that people would be concerned about, and I think that's why we really haven't had to talk people out of variance requests. A lot of times if they'll ask, or they say, well, I'll just get a variance, then we'll have to say, we'll guide them, like, here are the statutory requirements. You're probably not going to meet this standard. You're likely not going to meet this standard, so perhaps you want to try something else. So we do try to do that as much as possible. So to be good BZA members, here are some things that you might want to look at in the code. Michelle, maybe you can hop to those as I mention them, so you can see what they are and where they are. I'll read them to you. So the first one is the rules of construction, and pretty much every zoning ordinance or land development code has something like this put into the code, which helps you interpret what things mean. What does this word mean? The present tense includes future tense, and future tense includes present, which is kind of a really weird circular argument, but same with singular and plural. It's just simplifying things so we don't get real nitpicky about what stuff means. You all know that shall or must is mandatory, should or may is permissive. So these are things that you should just be aware of if you ever have to make an interpretation, or you're ever handling an appeal. And right below that, the measurement standards are the guides to how we measure those things that do have dimensional standards. How do we measure building coverage? How do we measure building frontage, building height, building setbacks, stories, So you might want to go through and kind of look at that, how we measure lots, and if it's irregular lots, we measure at the building line. So at least just know, that there are these standards, and so if somebody is appealing a staff decision saying they didn't, interpret the measurement right, that this is where you would go. Next one is the non-conforming section. So these are things somebody may decide they want to do an addition onto a non-conforming structure. And maybe we tell them, well, you can't do that because we have rules about expanding that structure, and maybe they appeal that to you guys. And so you want to know what conditions would allow them to actually do that. And non-conforming lots, what can you do with those? We do have a definition section, and that is mostly for terms of art. It's not for ordinary terms that you can find in the dictionary, but just things that are used in a specific way in the code. Another thing that becomes important in appeals or an interpretation of the code are zoning district intent statements, and those are at the very beginning of the chapter for zoning district and use standards. So sometimes, a decision will say it's supposed to support the intent of the district, and so you would go back to this intent and you would look at that. The other thing that we have is the complete streets policy. That's in Appendix B. And this is for supposed to be the basis for any time we would revise any of those street type standards. The engineer can, make a determination that usually a neighborhood street should look like this, but in this case, we're gonna, change this section of the street. But this table right here in Appendix B is supposed to give that guidance of, well, okay, you can change it, but you're still supposed to accomplish these things. For example, in landscape amenity areas, sometimes people will question the number of street trees they're supposed to have or could have, and just be aware we do have these targets for a percentage of tree cover or tree canopy that's supposed to cover the right of way. So if they decide to move a tree back or remove a tree or propose something like that, there may be some flexibility involved with street trees, but this is what we're supposed to accomplish. And the other things that you'll probably want to be familiar with is the Park System Master Plan and the Gardner Comprehensive Plan, because that is what everything is based on. That is what we're trying to accomplish with all these regulations. So you can see those documents on our website. I think they're on the planning page. Michelle organizes this.
Don't get sick.
You're right.
Watch my bad driving. Here's the Gardner Comprehensive.
Okay, and we have amended that comprehensive plan several times. We're still trying to get it formatted, but so just be aware of that. Okay, any questions on the guide to the land development code? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so no questions for staff, what we just were presented.
I actually do have a question.
Okay, perfect.
So if a variance request is to come to us, it's a request that's saying that we need to review maybe a decision that you guys have made. What kind of materials do we get to review? Because you all prepare the materials for us, what will the recommendation say? I mean, if they're asking about a decision you've made, is that the understanding of our role?
It is the understanding, except that what you're talking about is an appeal
Okay.
of administrative decision. A variance is something they initiate, something they want. They just don't want to have to put their house within this required setback range that the code has, or they want to modify a side setback, or they want to have a bigger accessory structure than we allow, or anything like that.
Okay.
And we will give you the same kind of staff reports that you're used to seeing that highlights the review criteria, our thoughts on the review criteria, our recommendations as staff. And so I think what you're saying is that can be a little awkward on an appeal when we've made the decision to begin with, and then we're giving you the staff report. But you need to know what we based our decision on, because you're going through that same process. So we'll have to have in detail for you our review of that, probably more detail than you normally would get. You would have to have all the documents that we would have used, every criteria that we would have looked at that's applicable in making that decision. And then you would have to walk through it just like we did and see if you came to the same conclusion.
Okay. In the past, didn't the applicant that wanted the variance, don't they have like a form they fill out and they give answers and kind of not necessarily plead their case, but explain their case? Sometimes there's pictures, sometimes,
There's
So
an
there's-
application.
There's not just a staff report, there's also more detailed information, I think, from the applicant than we normally get from just a presentation, I think.
I had another question. Would a common variance be something like if a homeowner wanted to put a room addition on their home, and they are bouncing right up against the setbacks, and they want, let's say, 6 inches, to go 6 inches into the, if you had 9-foot setback, they said, hey, we want to go another 6 inches and cut that short? Would that be an example of a variance?
I've never seen one that precise because.
Okay, let's say it's a foot. Let's say it's a foot.
Yes, that could be an example.
Yeah, but I feel like that wouldn't even meet the threshold of number 3 or whatever, because their use of land is valuable at this point. It has a house on it. So it wouldn't meet the threshold of rendering their land invaluable. Therefore, they wouldn't even meet number, I think it was 3.
Right, but
So-
I'm gonna show you the staff report for the one that Kelly had talked about.
Okay.
This, whether they meet it or not, they're allowed to apply for a rezoning. It's a right they have, or variance, sorry. It's a right they have, whether they wanna go through with it or not, and that's why we try to have a discussion with them about, what is it really feasible? Is it not? So here's a staff report from the one that we have had on this code. This one was a 14-foot variance from the required setback of 25 feet to allow for an 11-foot rear yard setback. So they wanted to build this attached patio cover 11 feet from the rear property line. So their variance was 14 feet. So we go through the same, this should look very familiar, same setup as the planning commission situation. We do mailed notice, just like we do for other public hearings. This is a public hearing. Provide background consistency with the comprehensive plan, just a description of what they are asking for. It was just a canopy over an existing concrete pad. And their applications, let me show you their application. So the applications for the planning commission are similar. You've seen these. They actually have to provide their own answers to those same criteria that we look at and the same criteria that you look at. So they will justify their reason for their variance request. And we will include all of this in the staff report. So they have to put a little thought into it also. This one, they made their case, hold on, there's they provided an as-built survey, for their property. You know, anything that they can do to try to make their case, we tell them to provide. Let's see. And then we do the same analysis that we would, what you've seen before, provide those 5 review criteria, the applicant response, which you saw on the application, and then staff's response. What?
They said a corner lot makes it unique.
Yeah, their comment was the corner lot makes it unique. There are quite a few other corner lots. This one wasn't really a very strong case. It was denied. It was not a popular decision, but you know, this is where the BZA comes into a true judicial decision-making body, as the appeal to the BZA, what the BZA does goes to the district court. So we go through all of those, you know, all the attachments. We give a recommendation and similar recommended motion, and so we provide any information that we have possible with the variance request. I have, in my career, I've never done an administrative, an appeal to administrative decision. We have gotten close. Usually it's something like, we're classifying your business as fitting into this use group, and that's not permitted in the district your building is in. Well, the property owner says, no, we fit into this use group, and that's what the appeal would be. So they would appeal the decision that the director made as that the use fits into this category, and they think it's in. So you, in that situation, you probably wouldn't get any sort of staff report because there's no review criteria. You would get all the information that we made, or that we used to make our decision, and any back and forth information between us and the applicant, and then the applicant would make their case. And in that situation, you're kind of a judge. So does that help kind of help you see the picture of what a variance request would look like? It's very similar, that we try to provide you with all the details in the staff report so that you can just look at that and hopefully have everything you need for making that determination.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I guess more of a comment or general concern. I don't see how almost anything can meet that 3rd threshold. It just seems, I don't know. The only one I can think of is like building a house on a small lot near Gardner Lake would kind of fit that, because it's like it renders their land useless if you can't put anything on it, because if the setbacks are so that you can't build anything on it, that makes any sense. Like, it's such a small lot that there's so much setback that you can't do anything with it. That would be the only thing I can think of in Gardner that would require some sort of variance that would meet that threshold.
That probably wouldn't mean it either.
Well, there we go.
In my experience, I lived and worked in a city that had a lot of topography, and that's where a lot of our variances came from, where, you know, you had these setbacks that you couldn't meet because, you know, the back of the property was just sloping off, and if you couldn't build it closer to the street, you couldn't build anything. And it's usually those extreme cases is what you're gonna see. A lot of them come through with multiple variance requests sometimes. You know, and it may be that you're able to support a portion of one. We had one quite a few years ago for an accessory structure, and we were able to kind of move it around and shift it, and he was able to make some changes. The BZA was able to convince him to make some changes to make most of the variances either go away or be significantly reduced. So there was a situation where they were okay with that. So it's a tough one.
I'm thinking that, on the lot thing, that, it was just created as a non-buildable lot to begin with. It'd be a non-conforming lot, and usually you can still build on those as long as you can still meet the standards. So your house might have to be pretty small, you know, but you can still build a house. So that's when those non-conforming standards become important. Sometimes, you know, maybe you have a big chunk of granite I've seen a lot one time that had just this big, beautiful rock outcropping on one side of it, and they didn't want to get rid of that natural feature, but they wanted to build a house, and they still had decent setbacks. So that was kind of a little bit of a departure there that was granted.
Okay, anything else for staff? Okay, I think, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Oh, goodness. A motion by Board Member Ford and seconded by Board Member Bowden to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0.
Can I just say that this little pouch with this pen in it